Right, so how will Rachel Reeves go about balancing the books? We're joined now in the studio by Gemma Tetlow, the Chief Economist at the Institute for Government. Great to have you here. What do you think we should be expecting to see then from this budget?
So I think this could be a really very consequential budget. As you've already been talking about, this is the first Labour budget for 14 years. And in a sense, we may learn quite a lot about the direction of this government. The Labour manifesto was actually not very clear about how it would differ from the plans that had been inherited from Jeremy Hunt. Actually, the Labour manifesto said that the Labour government would sign up to broadly the same public spending plans, and it set out some tax rises, but those were really fairly small. And I think what we've seen kind of leaking out over recent weeks is the Labour government starting to get to grips with the reality of what they're facing.
I feel like this is quite an important point, and I know this, this is speculation in some ways, but you say it's about Labour getting to the grips with the reality of what they're facing. Do you think that it is plausible that they just didn't realise how bad the situation was during the election campaign, or do you think that's not really plausible?
I think the plans that Jeremy Hunt had set out, the big thing within them that wasn't really plausible, and I think many people, IFG, the Institute for Fiscal Studies and others were talking about this before the election, was that Jeremy Hunt's plan to get debt falling relative to national income was predicated on some very tight spending plans. Jeremy Hunt had only detailed those spending plans up to March next year, and beyond that there was just a number penciled in, which was really not plausibly enough to deliver the kind of quality of public services that the public were clearly asking for, and I think both major parties were promising in the election campaign.
So in order to, I guess, grapple with that, it looks like we're going to see some kind of tax rises on the way. And really, there has been a bit of a straitjacket, I guess, put on Labour going into this budget by saying that they're not going to be increasing taxes on working people and laying out, the three kind of building blocks of the tax system that they're not going to touch. So what do you think we can expect in terms of tax rises?
Yes, we had an unfortunate situation with the election manifestos where both Labour and Conservatives really tied their hands on raising any of the major taxes. That does mean that the new government may well be looking for tax rises that are potentially more distortive because they're trying to raise it from some of the smaller taxes.
What do you mean by distortive?
So essentially raising taxes that cause people to either stop doing certain types of economic activity or to shift the way that they do their economic activity to try and avoid the higher taxes. And then, of course, we've had the debate about whether an increase in employers' national insurance contributions, which is the one most significant thing that's been leaked out in recent weeks, whether that is always not something that was ruled out within the Labour manifesto. But if they did go for that, that is one of the bigger taxes. It's a broad-based tax. Something like that would be less distortive than trying to raise that same amount of money, for example, from one of the much smaller taxes.
We've heard, haven't we, from some of the kind of business lobby groups that they're worried about the impact some of these changes could have on business, that they may, I guess, some of the distorted things you're talking about, stop recruiting so much or even lay people off. Do you think that these are kind of legitimate concerns, or do you think this is like the classic lobbying that we always see before these big fiscal events?
I think the government does face a difficult task because, as I say, they inherited some not really credible fiscal plans from the previous government, so they do need to do something to raise taxes or find ways of cutting spending. And however you do that, that will have some economic impacts. But at the same time, the government is obviously trying to lay the groundwork for stronger future economic growth. So I think we do need to look at the package of measures that they're announcing in the round and really think, taken together, given that they do need to raise taxes or cut spending, does this look like a sensible way in the round of trying to minimise the costs and maximise the benefits you can get?
And also the final thing I wanted to ask you as well is that the other thing that we're really expecting is a change to some of the kind of fiscal rules, particularly the debt rule. Do you think that's a kind of sensible thing for the Chancellor to be doing, or do you think that it's something that we should be worried about?
There were definitely some clear problems with the rules that she inherited, so particularly the debt rule that applies just to debt falling between two specific years in the future. The previous government had gamed that quite significantly, so announcing policies that kicked in to time that specifically. And because of the measure of debt that they were targeting, it did limit the extent to which you could borrow for investment. So I think there is a reasonable case to be made for using a different measure of debt. The measure of debt that seems like Rachel Reeves may look at would allow them to, for example, channel more money through the new National Wealth Fund and UK Infrastructure Bank, where the government is in return getting some sort of financial asset on the other side of that.
Okay.
So there's an argument you can make.
Okay, thanks very much. It's great to have you on the show ahead of this all-important budget. Thank you.